All I'm offering is the truth, nothing more. Oh yeah, welcome Mere Morpheans to another episode of the Mere Morpheus podcast, number 12 here. I'm your host Kyrin. I'm doing this live on the 14th of April 2025. Now, as you might surmise, this is the podcast where I expose the inner dark truth behind the Morpheus project. Ooh. Okay, no, there's not going to be any of that going on because I don't think there is any. Unfortunately, no Matrix level shenanigans going on behind the scenes. Instead, we're going to be examining the open source method, the open source just in general, learn about the positive side of open source, of why trust is rather important, squashing a common misconception I keep hearing, 3 important requirements that you'd perhaps find in open source, and to finish off, a long, deep breath of calmness. So let's jump into the first one here, and we'll start off with a little definition. This isn't from this book, but I actually found The Cathedral and the Bazaar by Eric S. Raymond, which was musing on Linux and open source by an accidental revolutionary. It's a really good piece. It's kind of an essay-ish book. It's not super long. But open source, for those who haven't heard perhaps the term before or wondering what it is a decentralized software development model that encourages open collaboration. I think that's the best way of kind of putting it. And I actually stole that from Wikipedia, which is open source as well, in a way. And I talked in the first couple of episodes about why open source was needed for the decentralization aspect of protection from overzealous governments, for example, of why you would want and need to have this kind of protection from authorities from a centralized location. And that's kind of rooted in a rather, I don't know, negative outlook. It's certainly not a positive thing, a rather defensive position, if you will. And I'd like to talk about the more positive aspects of open source and perhaps the offensive, even though that doesn't feel particularly right. I wouldn't call open source offensive anyway. And I'm not going to particularly get into the, I guess, how-to of open source. And this is because I think once upon a time, it was a little bit easier in a sense to contribute to open source, to understand what it is and how it works. So I'm thinking of the time when you could code something for Linux and it would just be available, editable. You could test it out for yourself on your own hardware. When a simpler time, musing on the old days, which was even before I was born. And it was in the time when I guess it was more about, operating systems of your own hardware and making that, more accessible for yourself, of not being trapped into the Microsoft, unipolar landscape that was out there, of individualist, simpler things like PGP, pretty good privacy, where, it was so simple you could write it on a t-shirt and carry it across borders and be an international terrorist for doing that. And, technically, I guess, that was more, I guess, it wasn't even called open source then. It was a bit more like freeware, for example. And I also understand some of the examples I gave proprietary, like PGP, but it birthed things like Open PGP Standard and GNU PG. So you get my drift of what I'm getting at here. Nowadays, when you're talking about open source, it's a lot more complex because you're complicated dealing with more people. You're dealing with businesses because you can have businesses that open source portions, for example, Meta open sourcing the Llama models, and more money at stake. There's more variables, more everything, more Morpheus, in fact. So I'm going to talk about, I guess, like the method of it in general. And I kind of compare open source to the scientific method. It's not just about the results that are generated. It's about how those results were generated, how to get to these things. In essence, you're showing all of your workings for the whole world to see, and to prove that the answers, the things that you get at the end, are real. In fact, we're going back to high school maths. And so if you think about it, why is one of the reasons, and I'm not sure if this is still the case, perhaps probably is, with all the, LLMs and stuff like this, why would teachers get you to showcase that you had to prove your working to get to the answer? So you couldn't just see, ODE, ordinary differential equation, or something like that, and you couldn't just write down the answer. You'd actually have to show the logical steps of how you got to that. And the reason for this is because, you could get the same answer, the truth in essence, via cheating and knowing the answers beforehand, like one of my friends Nitin did in high school, and then subsequently confessed up because he's a bit too much of a guilty conscience. And the reason you're doing this is to show, okay, sure, you can get the truth, the final answer, but it can be a suboptimal thing. You could optimize for cheating, like my friend Nitin did, or you could optimize for someone who understands the principles of mathematics to get to their final answer. The truth is, one of those things where you want to strive for it as much as possible, but it's also about how you got there and what it's used for an example. So you can have things like black truths. I could just go up to a fat person, tell them they're fat. I think objectively that's true, but is that a good truth to put out there and to just hurt someone like that? No. You can have kind of misleading truths as well, such as the statistics. The gender pay gap is indeed a real thing, but what is the reasons behind it for it? No, it's not because men hate women and pay them 75 cents on the dollar. It's because of like maternity leave and childbirth, and because men are crazy and do shit like run multinational companies and be CEOs and hate their lives and things like this. So, it doesn't provide the full story. If you're thinking about it in an open source example with AI, the open source LLMs, the reason that they are popular and why people want to use them is because they want to see for themselves, are they replicable? If I use all of the same inputs trained on the same data, will these weights still occur, or was there like massaging of the data behind the scenes or biases? And a lot of times there is, and this is where you can decide, okay, at least I agree with this bias. This is something that I think is useful, even if it's perhaps for other people not useful. So open source, I guess, is ultimately a way of showing the truth of getting to something, plus showing how it's true, and therefore generating trust, which is getting us onto our little next topic here. Don't trust, verify. If you've done your 1,000 hours, 100 hours of Bitcoin research, which I would recommend that you do, you'll come across this phrase rather often. And the whole point of it is that trusting in humans or human-controlled things, like a product or a company, can lead to bad outcomes. You can get tricked, you can get misled, you can be defrauded. We need look no further than Mt. Gox, which I don't think was fraud, it was more incompetence, or FTX and SBF, which certainly was fraud. Those are things that have perhaps impacted some of you that are listening, perhaps not. A more common example, I would say, is just an experience with a bank. I think everyone has had an experience where their bank has closed an account, or stopped them from making a payment, or moved money around, or something, things are missing. You haven't been able to access what you thought. Your money isn't actually yours. And this is one of those parts where, okay, don't trust, verify is the whole point of this thing. Like, where's the money coming from? Did it go to the right place? Am I in control of that? And so the verify part is that, you can check with Bitcoin, for example, you can check that the money is in your wallet, that you're sending it to where you want to send it, and that it has arrived there. And, all of this is backed up by now 1 zettahash per second of energy expenditure, many different wallet interfaces, which are open source themselves, and not a single trust me bro in sight. We'll quibble a little bit about that a little bit further on. So open source is certainly working and has created a multi-trillion-dollar asset of just Bitcoin, and then, getting closer to tens of trillions probably soon in many other things related to that. Now, one quibble I do have with this is that with this phrase, don't trust, verify, which I quite like. I enjoy. I think it's a step in the right direction when you're talking about money and things like this. But you're missing out on the tremendous opportunity that trust does provide. So I personally prefer the Russian version of this, which is trust but verify. And this is throwing us back into the nuclear disarmament days of Ronald Reagan. And this was like an old Russian proverb, and essentially saying like, yeah, I trust in you, but I'm also going to check that you're doing the right thing. And I think this is applying it to the human context, in a way where you're still going to need humans for basically everything in this world. Almost every action I take, an interaction in the world, relies on trusting someone to have done or be doing their job. So if we're looking at driving on the roads, I'm trusting people to know the rules and that they should stay on the left side in Australia when they're driving. I am trusting when I go to the gym and I'm beneath this ginormous fan, I'm trusting that the person has put the bolts in correctly and that shit's not just going to fall on my head. On my feet, because I'm doing handstands beneath it. So there's plenty of things like eBay, for example. If you're looking at a company which has built its whole model essentially around trust, I'm trusting random people on the other side of the world that I can send them things and they'll send them money. And this whole has a verification system behind that of reputation. And this is kind of getting into the Morpheus section as well. So I certainly prefer this trust but verify aspect of using trust. It can be valuable as a way of shortcutting many things, but you do want this kind of verification or the ability to verify as well. So you can get some know-it-alls, for example, and trust, and this is where getting into this trust aspect, I can't do everything, and I think most people can't, and so you kind of need a collective group to help you with this, and this is where you're trusting not on someone's words, but on the, I guess, actions of code, perhaps is perhaps a better way of putting this, of you can go and verify things to a deeper degree than just someone saying, yeah, don't worry, like, Bernie Madoff coming to you and saying, like, I've got this great opportunity. So for Bitcoin, for example, I think nowadays it's impossible to be able to verify everything. Perhaps if you are still very technical, you could do it on a technical level. So you could learn of the failure nodes, for example, of, how does SHA-256 encryption work, the nuances of the C++ language, and how that might affect the technical aspects of the code that Bitcoin's written in. SECP-256K1 elliptic curves. That's a long stretch. I don't think many people could do it, but perhaps there's a couple who could verify all of those things. But then when you're building things on top of it more and more, the layers are pretty thick now. What happens if BlackRock owns 10% of the circulating supply? What is going to happen with quantum computers? And is this exposing, Bitcoin addresses to being unlocked by anyone? On the Ethereum side of things, are the L2s cannibalizing the main chain? In recent news, if the gold standard of cold storage multi-sig wallets and doing a transfer of 3 or 5 signatures by Bybit is able to get hacked and misplaced and 1.5 billion stolen, how the hell is like little old me pleb meant to verify everything on all of these chains and make sure that they're working as intended and how people say they are? There's no way I can gain all of that knowledge and do that myself. So I think at some level, all of us have to have some trust in many of these things, especially if you're more on the investing side of things, and whether that be investing your money or investing your time or your energy. These are the sorts of things that you want to be thinking about when you're doing this. And so how can you get this level of trust? I think open source is the verification tool that's probably best suited for many of these things. So do I personally have the knowledge that Morpheus smart contracts are distributing tokens as they should be? No. Can I personally verify that the hard cap of 42 million is written in the code base? No, I don't know how to do that. Can I even know that, the Arbitrum and Base networks, which they were launched on, are the correct places to do this and that they're working as intended? No. Not a chance. But I'm reasonably confident that because of the way that Morpheus was set up, the open source contracts, everything's on GitHub, that there's not some sort of secret cabal working together to defraud me and defraud many other people. Because it's there, it's open, it's verifiable. All it would take is one default suspicious, disagreeable, prudent person to come along and expose the whole sort of thing. Now, you could be then saying, but just because it's open source doesn't mean, someone's going to do that. There's always going to be someone. There's always some suspicious guy who's going to go into those things. So this is where, I should clarify as well that I'm not against companies. I'm aware that Base and Arbitrum are, probably not open source. I don't think those two are open source layer 2s. I'm not against the people wanting to have privacy, safeguard secrets to keep the work that they've done for themselves. I like competition. I like free markets. I like you being able to own your own property. And if you've created code and you want to do that for yourself, that's awesome. It's more the aspect of when that then becomes into unfair competition, when there's a referee is corrupt, for example, or think about like the state, for example, or there's changes to the rules willy-nilly that impact people's freedom, liberty, or property, things like this. This is where I tend to have the idealism of open source in me. I'd say it's probably like 80%, 85% idealistic of the open source method, and then 15% of like, okay, in reality, not everything can be open sourced. Much like decentralization, we talked about in the last episode, not everything can be decentralized down to the very atom. No, that's silly. But the core concept needs to be there, and then you need to have some pragmatism on what sort of trade-offs you're going to take as well. So I'm going to be talking more about, I guess, I'm happy to trust Arbitrum when I know that Base is there as well. And this is that aspect of having trust in things when there is more than one of it, when there's competition, in fact. And we'll be talking a bit more about this in an episode about being chain and agent agnostic. One thing I wanted to highlight here was a misconception that comes up pretty commonly with open source and Creative Commons licensing, for example. It's the ever-present, but someone's going to copy it, with the implication that they'll somehow steal your work and make money from it. And this is, I guess, epitomized, I think, by the digital artist Xcopy in one of his more famous pieces, which was the right-click and save as guy, which was essentially, NFTs, digital art, but I can just right-click that. I have and copy and save that. Right-click and save. That's mine now. And the aspect of and I quite enjoy his art. I'm somewhat of a mini collector, and all of his works are of the most permissive licensing, the CC0 license, which is essentially waiving all of the rights and claims to his work, so people can remix it, edit it, copy it, not give attribution to him at all if they're doing any of these things. And this is where it's getting into that aspect of like, okay, if this is true, if, giving it all away for free and making it available to anyone, is this going to harm you? And the same sort of arguments you hear about open source. And the answer to this is largely no. Perhaps in some very rare individual instances and cases, yes. But for the large part, no. Xcopy, once again, has another piece of artwork called Grifters, and is rather popular. And to the utter shock, horror, dismay of the community, they're all copied and put on the Ordinals network. How dare they? How dare they? And what happened from this? Someone just stole his art and they just put it on another chain. Like, isn't this bad? Isn't this going to, they're just stealing his work? What happened? Nothing, because nobody cares about the copy of the thing. They want the original. They want the story behind it. They want the aspect of owning, something connected to this person who they have some affinity for, or the provenance of this is the original. This is where it came from. And so him making it this open license, sure, he could have made it a, I own all the works to this, and so every time someone copies it and puts it on their screen in a video like I am doing right now, sure, he could do that, but that's just going to harm him in the long run. The most important games in life are non-zero sum, and I think this is the thinking that gets wrong. The misconception is that everything is zero sum game. That guy who put the grifters on ordinals, sure, maybe he made like $100 from it or something like that. And the implication is that $100 could have been X copies. If he'd had the licenses and things like this, that would have been his, which is incorrect. That's not how these things work. And the zero sum game of this, and I guess the non-zero sum game, is I'm talking about X copy right now. That guy actually probably just promoted X copy to more people, and if they saw the art and if they dived into it more, they might have realized like, oh, this is where the original artist created it and where it actually comes from. So, that wasn't parasitic to what happened to X copy, a guy copying his artwork. That in fact just promoted him and made it more popular, more widely available. And this is kind of linking to the value for value model as well. This is why I make this available anytime, anywhere for anyone, is because I could put all of this behind a Patreon and a paywall and, make you pay to gain access to these things. But I'm more of the, once again, the idealistic here. The information should be available, widely spread, free. And so, is in the Morpheus context, offering the fair launch contracts for anyone who else wants to use them, is that going to hurt Morpheus? No. Am I hurting the project by talking about it openly and sharing info that took me ages to hunt down, of scrolling through the Discord for, decisions and things that were made or reasonings for why this existed and this doesn't exist now? No. Is David Johnston, who writes these kind of essays and puts it on his blog for anyone to access, is he getting cheated by writing these things, which obviously take him a lot of time? No. Some more examples that I care about from the podcasting world, for example. Joe Rogan was on Spotify for a long time, for a couple of years, and he got his payday, but then why is he now available everywhere and putting it everywhere? It's because that actually hurt his numbers for sure. By putting it in one place, he lost people like me who, I was just a casual listener, but I became a non-listener for like 2 to 3 years because I don't like Spotify. I don't want to use their app. And these are the sort of mentality and things that people miss. It's very short-term thinking when you're talking about open source and you're putting this out there and anyone's just going to take it, anyone's going to steal with it. That's not the thing that hurts you. And one of the things that actually can hurt you is if you don't follow the 3 requirements. So in preparation for this episode, I was doing some reading on articles just about people who have spent time in open source, multiple open source projects, what they see happens when they fail, and what are the kind of most important core aspects to something that's open source to succeed. And there was one great article titled "How We Maintain a Healthy Open Source Project," published by Dan Funk from the Spiff Workflow project. And he has 3 core takeaways, 3 requirements, if you will, of what's needed. And this is infrastructure, community, and funding. So the infrastructure is, I guess, this aspect of it. It's got to be the focus of the project. If you're trying to build something out in an open source manner, you really don't want to be getting sidelined or following niche little paths for open source is about allowing anyone to come in, and I guess a good open source project is one that generates a lot of people or actually, success is a weird word. Depends what you want to do. You could create a very small little niche thing that is only applicable for niche people, and that could be a very successful project. You could have something that's mid-sized. I'd say Podcasting 2.0 is probably about this mid-sized, has hundreds, maybe in the low thousands of people who are contributing or have contributed to that on the both the technical of writing documents and documentation and the code and helping to improve RSS, and then also on the promotion side, like I do, where I talk about it, like right now. And then you can have the real big ones like Linux and things like that, or Bitcoin, which are revolutionary and change the world. WordPress is probably up there for this as well. And this is where for example, for Morpheus, I see the infrastructure as, this is building the infrastructure so that people can come in with their own agents and help to monetize that, to spread that out to as many people as possible, and that we're not just relying on one OpenAI company or one company, whatever, for access to these agents, which would be a really terrible outcome, I think, in my opinion. But it's not getting distracted by like, oh, we need to build the actual open source AI agent. No, that's leaving for other people. If they want to open source that, they can. That's awesome. But no, this is more the infrastructure around things. Community. You need the community to be engaged, to be friendly to newbies, to be inviting, have good documentation, for example, and have passionate people. So when I look at Morpheus, I think that's pretty bang on. There's multiple podcasts now of people talking about Morpheus and videos. There's the Discord and the social media where that's active and helping for people to join in and talk about it. There are the core developers doing interviews, for example, and this is in, I guess, the media presence, even though there's no team. There's certainly people working on it and talking about it. And even in real life events such as the DEAI days, one coming up in Austin very soon. I'll talk more in an episode in the future about highlighting people and why there's no team, but there is a community. And then finally, funding must be sustainable and long-term. Once again, you can have projects which are just hobby ones, people doing it for the fun and hell of it, because they enjoy it, and this is usually where they kind of start off. But eventually, you probably do need the funding to be a way for people to work on this full time, especially if you're trying to be a bigger project, if you've got aims to really change the world in some sort of sense. This is where the funding needs to be, have some sort of sustainable method for that. This is where Morpheus, I think, is in spades because it's got the 4 buckets. It's the self-bootstrapping reinforcing mechanism for building the infrastructure, which is the most important thing at the end of the day. My last little thought here is on the main problem I see with other projects that kind of fail, open source projects, is actually around the community. Technically, things seems to work themselves out. Funding, that can go through periods, but if you've got people who are passionate and will do things where the funding doesn't even matter. Like, you couldn't pay me enough money to create a new podcast. Like, I'm not going to do it, but I'll do it on something that I find interesting and that's valuable and that I want to talk about. There's literally no amount of money that you could offer me for my time. And this is kind of where it gets to the community aspect and internal battles of forking. I wanted to call something about like forking hell for this chapter, but no. The thing here is where you see people fighting, having disagreements, and not being able to resolve those in a friendly manner. And this is where you do get projects forking. And sometimes that's healthy and needed, especially if the founders perhaps of an open source project are mean, are stingy, are hard to work with, dare I say, assholes. And when I look at certain projects recently that have had some of these kind of like internal kerfuffles, you can see where if things went differently, these could lend to like the project failing as a whole, or these forkings and division of labor and not helping. Podcasting 2.0 recently has had people claiming the Adam and Dave aren't doing enough. They need, Adam needs to be evangelical. He needs to be going to the podcasting conferences. He needs to be going to, doing keynotes and really pushing it out there and things like this. Once again, the should word. I hate that word. And, questioning Dave and some of the technical aspects of, the podcast images tag is terrible and et cetera, et cetera. All of these sorts of things, if Adam and Dave weren't chill guys, they could certainly just be like, fuck this. Like, I'm not going to do this. I don't want to do this anymore. Instead, they dealt with it in a calm and reasoned manner, and everything continues on as normal. If you look at Matt Mullenweg, for example, he's in plenty of hot water in the last couple of months for the kerfuffle, the controversy of WordPress and the WP engine. And that's probably one where you can see, like, okay, he's not handling that very well. Like, this is where the community is spending a lot of time and energy on stuff that could be handled in a much more calm, relaxed manner. And so my main thoughts just on this is the key to avoid fights, the project's forking, bad blood, wasted time. It's a nice, long, calm breath. And this is why I actually fence it a lot of the time, as you can see by Kyrin Cat fence sitting here. I don't have many strident views on things, and even when I do firmly believe something very much, it's hard for me to see a case where I will completely dismiss something or hate someone for the rest of my life or something like that, or leave a project and swear off and only tell bad things about people. So for example, tariffs, I don't know. Trump, I don't know. Upcoming Aussie election, I don't know. Certain topics, I'm looking at you, sex, politics, and religion, are just incendiary by nature. I've recommended this book before, but The Tyranny of Words by Stuart Chase really gets into semantics and why people fight and spend a lot of time over things where it's not they don't hate each other. It's more like, and maybe they do hate each other. It's more like words can cause disputes which are unnecessary, and just bad communication is part of this. So, I think a lot of projects probably die for this reason more than anything else. When it comes to open source, the incendiary nature, it's not the technical reasons, it's people getting into fights, of not having a calm, chill disposition. You're always going to get people coming in, claiming this, claiming that, why isn't price number going up? You're stealing stuff from this. There's always going to be people looking for a fight, and this is where you really got to trust in the people themselves who are working on the project to have that calm breath. Sure, there's assholes out there, but you just got to take it in stride and be like, okay, that's fine. I'm not going to engage with you. I'm not going to do this. Well, we're here to work. We're here to, create something that's valuable, interesting, and will, in the case of Morpheus, I think, improve the future by having decentralized private AI agents for anyone. In the case of Podcasting 2.0, of enhancing the ability for anyone, anywhere in the world to get their voice out and not have to rely on places like Spotify or YouTube to be able to do that. And this is personally why I love open source projects and can contribute to them in the ways that I best can, and trust in them and trust in the open source method. So thank you very much, everyone, for tuning in. We had a couple of live people here as well. Juan in the Mere Mortal says, trust in them. And then Cole, I probably won't say this. No, I'll say it. Cridlin pisses me off. I have a hard time listening to Pod News Weekly. And that was, someone who is perhaps a bit more spicy coming in. But even he's, contributed a lot to the project as well. So this is, the nuances of these things, and why open source is not easy and is not the answer to everything, and is very hard to do. So this is a value for value podcast. It's not open source. It's very much reliant on me, but I do make this available anywhere, anytime for anyone, especially on the audio side of things. I just upload this to YouTube because there's no easy place to upload videos to multiple different locations, and for better or for worse, YouTube is the place for you for video. So I do this, and I am never going to be sponsored. I'm never going to have people paying me money to talk about this topic or that topic, or if I highlight agents being built on Morpheus in the future, there's never going to be the incentive of them coming out and telling me I need to, or paying me to do this. The motives of why I do these things are because I think it's important and because I am interested in the topic and want to talk about it. So I provide all of this value for you upfront here, available, and I just ask that you provide that back in some shape or form. Many different ways you can do this. The easiest and probably the most valuable right at this stage would be just sharing it. Sharing this with a friend. Word of mouth is super important. So if you heard some topics on here, if you have a episode in particular that you want to recommend, Mere Morpheus episode number 12, he talked about open source. I thought he had some interesting points. Any of the 4 bucket ones I think are pretty decent episodes for newbies coming in. Recommend those to them. Sharing it, all these sorts of things. Giving a sub, a like, providing feedback, joining me on the live like Cole and Juan have is helpful as well. We have the talent. So if you recognize things that I've got wrong, if you have topic suggestions that you think I would enjoy, if you want to contribute to the show of some sort, I am thinking perhaps later in the year of doing some interviews again. So if you have people or suggestions, it's very much helpful. Graphics, audio quality, a website, anything that you think that I would need and want to help out with is very much appreciated. And finally, there's the treasure aspect. I've got linked down below a address where you can send some Morpheus if you want to. That is also the address that you can use for a staking reference. It's like a referral thing. If you are thinking of contributing to the capital bucket. And finally, there is the builders subnet I have created as well, and you could stake to that and help reward me in those manners. So multiple different ways you can do that. I think down below I also have a PayPal, and if you go onto Fountain, the podcasting app, you can actually stream me Satoshis as you're listening, which would be super awesome. And yeah, we're going to end it there for today. I've got 4 more episodes before I start traveling to Europe, and that will be the end of season 1. So there will be a hiatus of some sort. And yeah, just a reminder, if people aren't valuing this podcast, I got a really encouraging message from David the other day saying that he listens in and enjoys it. And these are the sort of things that give me the passion and the willpower, the energy, the appreciation to continue on creating these things. Because if I'm just talking into the void, if no one's really enjoying it, the podcast goes away. So if you enjoy it, leave a comment, reach out, all these sorts of things are very much appreciated. So we're going to end it there for today. A bit of a long one. Thank you very much for joining in, and ciao for now. Until the next time. Bye.